Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so honored to have with us today Jon Freedman. He's the Global Government Affairs Leader at General Electric. Welcome to Green is Good, Jon Freedman.
Well, thank you, John. It's great to be here.
Well, this is General Electric's first turn on Green is Good, and we're so glad you're going to be doing that turn for General Electric today. But before we talk about all the great and important work you're doing at GE, I want you to share the Jon Freedman story first with our listeners.
Well, John, my story starts in many ways when I went to the Wharton School 27 years ago, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just hoped it would expose me to some opportunities, open some doors, and I'd figure things out. And as it turns out, my first job was in real estate development. I got to work in Honolulu and then in Northern California, just outside San Francisco. And then I took a job with a real estate company owned by a Paris-based multi-utility called Suez Environment. And after about 2 years at that company, I was selected for their senior leadership program, which grooms high-potential employees for potentially CEO-track jobs. And as part of that, they wanted me to see the core business, which in Suez's case was a global water company. And so that's how about 20-plus years ago I ended up getting the water industry, a completely random course of events.
Got it. And so talk a little bit about now Global Government Affairs Leader at GE. When did you take on that position?
Right. Well, I joined GE 14 years ago, and I was the Mergers and Acquisitions Leader responsible for helping GE create a global water business. It had a big energy business, John. In fact, GE's installed base of energy technologies generates about 25% of the world's electricity. But I think you probably know electricity generation is incredibly water intensive, and so a lot of our customers, when we would install gas turbines or other power generation equipment, would ask if we could also deal with their water treatment needs. So GE decided that it would add a water treatment business, and now we have 50,000 water customers in 130 countries around the world. And GE generally does things in a pretty significant way, and it did that in water as well as in energy.
Wow.
So after leading the acquisition of some companies to help build the water business, my next role was to work in GE corporate headquarters, where I was really fortunate to be the project manager responsible for leading the creation of GE's global environmental initiative, which is now called Ecomagination. And then after that role, I got to come to Washington, D.C., where I am right now, to lead government affairs for the newly created water business.
So wait a second, Jon. You're the creator or co-creator of Ecomagination?
I had the honor of leading a team of many people who created it, including some unbelievable GE leaders and some consultants like Brad Gentry, who's at Yale University and still quite a good friend of GE's. Yes.
You're a humble guy, but that's an amazing. Ecomagination is just so wonderful, and all the great work you're doing. And I want to get to that because I know the key topic we're going to talk about today is water. And this is such a critical topic with regards to sustainability and making a more sustainable planet that we all get to enjoy. And for our listeners out there that want to follow along, I'm on your great website right now. It's www.gewater.com. You know, I have a home and a business that's based out of Fresno, California. And I don't know, Jon, if there's a place in America that's more water challenged right now than Fresno, California. And this doesn't, and it's not to diminish anybody else's needs, but man, it's the ag belt of the United States, maybe the ag belt of the world right now, and water scarcity is massive there. Can you share a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of the macro issues on a global basis and also the micro issues on a California basis with regards to water scarcity and your view of it all?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Let me just say first that I have worked very closely with Fresno State University over the years, Dave Zoldowski in particular, who runs their Water Institute, which is a center for the state university system in California. And I'm very familiar with the issues in the Central Valley of California. It's unbelievable challenges. But I think what we're seeing in California and elsewhere is really a function of this. The global consulting firm McKinsey & Company released a study about 5 years ago, and in the study, they said the world had reached a tipping point where demand for fresh water exceeds supply. And they have some projections, and it shows that gap growing to about 40% over the next 25 years unless measures are taken. And what I think we're seeing is that imbalance play out across headlines all over the world. And if you look at, about 3 weeks ago, there was a front-page story in the New York Times, and it said the taps are running dry in Sao Paulo.
Right.
That's in Brazil, a country with 13% of the world's freshwater resources. And in China, the Ministry of Land and Resources recently released a study, and it said in 60% of the cities it's monitoring, the groundwater is too polluted to drink. And then, in California, you're now in the fourth year of the worst drought in the last 500 in the state. And so I think this is kind of a function of there's a fixed amount of water on Earth, but the population has been growing. We've had increased industrialization, and climate change is redistributing that fixed amount of water. And so we are experiencing scarcity in many, many places.
What, is there any simple answers, or what can be done, Jon? You do things on a scale basis. You have a fascinating leadership role at GE. GE does things on a scale basis, and you have visibility that's far beyond just the United States, which is so wonderful to have you on the show. What can we do? Because this is truly, besides climate change, one of the most pressing issues of today.
Look, there are three things you can do to address scarcity. And, the first is conserve water. And if you think about California, I don't know the exact number, Jon, but there are probably 20 or 30 blue ribbon panels and commissions right now, and they're all looking at different ways to use water more efficiently. And that's important, and it's the first step, but it only gets you so far. And then you can desalinate water, particularly if you have coastline or brackish groundwater reserves. In California, they're now building a 50 million gallon a day desalination plant in Carlsbad, so in Southern California, just north of San Diego. So we will see more desalination. But the problem with desalination is it's expensive and energy intensive. So the third thing you can do, and what makes the most sense, is reuse wastewater. In other words, you treat wastewater in a way that you strip out the H2O molecule so you can use it for agriculture, for industrial cooling water, and yes, even for drinking water. And so I think that holds the key to the future.
Does that last thing, I know I'm interrupting, does that last thing go back to what we just saw recently in the media with Bill Gates going around with his poop water? Is that part of the solution? That kind of technology?
I didn't look deeply into the Bill Gates
I'm sorry.
issue, but I did see the article. But yeah, I think what we're seeing is that, at the end of the day, what you want is the H2O molecule, and you can extract it from any source of water. And so if you have the technology, you're good to go.
And does the technology exist to make wastewater safe enough so it can be reused?
Absolutely. You can take advanced chemistries and membranes, and you can recover 70 to 85% of wastewater.
Wow.
You can take evaporation and crystallization technologies and recover 99+%. So the technology exists, absolutely.
So are we seeing a trend towards recycling and reuse around the world, or is that part of what you're doing with GE, pushing that trend and educating that people towards that kind of opportunity?
Well, here's the thing. We live in a world where there are 1.2 billion people, according to CSIS, I think here in Washington, people living in 43 countries in areas of chronic scarcity. But if you look globally, the world is reusing 3 to 4% of its wastewater today, just scratching the surface. Here in the U.S., the number is more like 6 to 8%. And in California, Jon, fourth year of this drought, they're probably only reusing 8 to 10%. So we're only scratching the surface of what can be done.
But when you have really smart governors like Governor Brown, and I'm not here to get political or anything, but you have a guy that was the youngest governor in California history and now the oldest governor, and he's been doing a great job on so many issues. How come he just doesn't engage with a great company like yours and just say, we're just going to solve this problem right here, right now. We're going to bring the best, water recycling technology to California, and we're going to get that number from 8 to 10 to 50 or 60%. Tell me what the mechanics are. What's the gap and the void that I'm missing in between? Where's the disconnect?
Right. Well, first of all, California would be considered, even though it's only at 8 to 10% reuse, one of the world's leaders in reuse because, again, the world's just scratching the surface. So California has been doing a very good job, but they can do a lot more. And here's what I would say. There are certain barriers to reuse, and those barriers are present in California, and they're present pretty much everywhere. And in short, there's a lack of clear standards as to what level of treatment is required for what level of reuse of the water. So if you want to use it for agriculture, how high do you have to treat it? If you look here in the U.S., there are no federal standards saying that. So it's left to each of the 50 states. Of the 50 states, 25 have regulations that are all over the board, 16 have non-binding guidelines, and 9 have nothing at all. So it's very hard for communities, for industry, to know what type of treatment they can use. The other thing, and I think the bigger issue, is economics. It is simply cheaper to take water from the ground or a river or even a potable municipal system where, by the way, water is almost universally underpriced than it is to buy and implement reuse technologies. So we have these barriers, and we need to work to overcome them. And California is probably farther ahead on that path than many others.
From also curb appeal, are people freaked out when they're being asked to use, recycled water, or is that an issue that through education and other forms you're able to overcome?
I think it breaks down like this. I think you and I and most other people would be freaked out by the idea of drinking treated wastewater, but as it turns out, it's perfectly safe to do. And so what's happened is there are a number of governments who have taken steps, like you said, John, education and outreach to make people comfortable with this concept. And the world leader in that is almost certainly Singapore, which today treats 30% of its wastewater for reuse. And they actually take treated wastewater, and a quarter of the water in their drinking water reservoirs is now made up of treated wastewater. And the government of Singapore was smart. It realized people would be unsettled by that, even though it's perfectly safe. So they embarked on an education and outreach campaign, and they invented something called New Water, a brand of bottled drinking water. And the government leaders actually took this treated wastewater in these bottles and drank it in public settings. And Singapore is actually really leading the way for the rest of the world.
So what did you say their recycling rate is of recycled water? That's fascinating. New water.
30% of all the wastewater in Singapore is treated and recycled, and in part that's just driven by a very far-sighted government. Singapore punches above its weight not only in commerce but in policy.
Are you do you then take that paradigm, because you travel and you get to touch so many countries, cities, states? Do you actually take that bottle, that New Water, with you and go give seminars or examples like that to other world leaders or politicians and say, hey, Singapore did this, you can do this too?
Even better, I take leaders from Singapore, the head of policy for their public utility board, and on trips. For example, the director of policy came with me to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, 3 years ago, and shared Singapore's policy experience with obviously a very water-scarce country, and just gave the Saudis ideas on how they could use more rewater. And by the way, I just got back from Saudi Arabia 3 weeks ago, where GE released a white paper highlighting many of the positive things the Saudis are doing, but offering additional examples from around the world as well. And it was extremely well received. And the Saudis should be commended, by the way, for all they're doing. But the other thing that GE did, John, is we developed a menu of policy options that governments can use to address water reuse. And we essentially said there are 4 things they can do. One is the education outreach we were talking about. Second is remove barriers. In other words, if there are unclear guidelines, develop clear guidelines. Third is provide incentives, and that's how you overcome the economic challenge. In the wind world or the solar world, there are tax credits. You could do the same thing for water reuse. And then finally, you can simply mandate reuse and say, hey, we don't have enough water, to go around, you have to reuse it.
Gotcha.
So we've seen examples of that all over the world that we do share with other governments.
You mentioned a little while ago that Carlsbad desalination plant in Carlsbad going in right now. Is that your technology or a competitor's technology? And is desalination part of the future of our water scarcity issue?
Yeah, it's a competitor's technology going in Carlsbad, but desalination tends to be, there doesn't tend to be that much differentiation among the various technologies these days. And I would say that GE is much more focused on water reuse. And the reason is that on average, it's 50% the cost of desalination and 50% the energy consumption. So it's really a better model for society. So, yeah, if there's no choice, it's great to have desalination. I mean, it ensures survival. But given an option, it would be somewhere after conservation and water reuse.
So really, when you're doing a takeoff on and you're helping governmental entities or others make decisions, the ROI on desalination is much lower than the ROI on recycling.
Well, that's right. I mean, recycling is definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's just a question of lining up policies. And by the way, we're seeing a number of governments around the world take the lead in this area. Israel, for example, is reusing about 85 to 90% of its wastewater today. And you could say, well, necessity is the mother of all invention. They're in a very arid place. But those policies can be adopted by other countries as well.
That's awesome. So, we got about 4 minutes left. Can you talk? We've talked about a lot of different things. Talk about companies. We have a lot of listeners, company leaders around the world that listen to the show. What can companies do to be part of the solution here and recycle and reuse more water?
John, when I think about what can drive more reuse, I say, well, it can be outright regulation and mandates, or it can be incentives, or the other thing I'm seeing is corporate sustainability programs. And the one I'll talk about now is GE's Ecomagination program, which we talked about at the outset of the show.
Yeah.
In 2008, we set a goal of using 25% less water between 2008 and 2015. So what are we, like 3 months into 2015, and we've already reduced our global water consumption by 45%. Never would have happened if we hadn't created a corporate sustainability program and set a goal. So I think there are a lot of other companies around the world that are doing exactly the same thing. So I think that's a very positive development. And the other thing I'm seeing is that companies are banding together with NGOs, with think tanks, with universities like Fresno State to do things collectively that are better for society. And again, my examples are GE focused, but that's where I work. And GE and Goldman Sachs got together 3 years ago, and they co-founded, along with the World Resources Institute, something called Aqueduct. Now, Aqueduct is an online water risk atlas that divides the world into 15,000 sub-water catchment basins. So that's a pretty good deal of granularity, and it's as I said, it's online, but it's an open resource available for everyone. Governments can use it. Businesses can use it. It'll shed light on scarcity so you can take action to use water more efficiently.
John, you talk about constructive collaborations and partnerships. I know we're about to end the show, but I also want to bring up you are an important member of Wharton's iGel board, and I met you because of Joanne Spigonardo and all the great work that's going on there. Talk a little bit about all that what that means to you in GE.
It's such an honor for me to affiliate with Wharton, John, especially after all these years. And, I teach a class at Penn called The Future of Water.
Wow. That's great.
Joanne Spigonardo is just an outstanding leader of the Initiative for Global Environmental Leadership. And, in fact, I'm going to be meeting with a Wharton professor Thursday morning to talk about leadership and change. So,
hey, John, thank you for, I'm so honored that you came on today. I'm going to have you come on, but back to Green is Good to continue this discussion. Again, if you want to learn more about all the great work that John's doing at General Electric, please go to www.gewater.com. Thank you, John Freedman, for being a sustainability superstar. You are truly living proof that green is good.